Welcome to Messy Life Podcast.
You know, life is messy, but it's in our mess that we find our message. And just because your life is messy, it doesn't mean you're messed up.
We want to open up our lives. We want to open up our mess. We want to open up what we've learned through really painful, dark journeys. And our hope on the other end of this podcast, on the other end of Messy Life, is that you would find courage and strength and laughter and joy in the midst of your journey, that you would know that you are not in this alone and that you are stronger than you ever thought you were.
So let's get messy. Like that.
So we are diving into our second podcast of Messy Life.
Yeah, I'm going deep diving this time.
Yeah, we're turning the tables this time. We are opening up our Messy Life podcast by talking about and processing pain. In the last episode, we talked about how pain is like a traveling professor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it knocks on the door of our life. And the greatest gift that we can give ourselves is to open the door and invite pain in to sit with us and teach us all the lessons that it has in store for us to teach. And so, like Joel mentioned, we're turning the tables today, and we are going to talk a little bit about his journey of pain and how it's been a great teacher to him. So,
Yeah, you know, the hard thing about this professor called pain is that he keeps showing up. You know, that's the most difficult thing. And so I want to tell a story about some pain that showed up in my life when I turned 40, just a couple years ago. And before I get into all of that, I want to just give you some background to it, because at 40, something started happening to me that I couldn't control.
yeah.
It was embarrassing. It was devastating to my self-confidence and even the persona that I had for myself.
Sure.
This person that I had seen myself as and worked so hard to create.
Yeah.
It was really eroding the foundation of that image, person, who I thought I was, all of those things. But before I get to sharing exactly what happened here recently, I got to go back a little bit just to kind of give you an idea of who I am. If you're an Enneagram person, I'm a 3. I am an achiever. And so part of my story in my life is the story of achieving and desiring to do great things. I graduated college with honors, which was a huge feat for me, who struggled in school in the beginning. I was just talking to my friend just the other day about this crazy time in law school when we decided to have our first child in law school. We had our first child, we had our son, Lincoln, and then wrote a book at the same time. I was traveling on the weekends doing Choir of the Fire, these big arena events, and then I'd fly back home, go to law school during the week, and somehow was writing this book, having our first child. And these accomplishments that I, would try to have happen or to accomplish, and many of them I successfully did accomplish. But this story of the achiever that I was living out, which isn't a bad thing. It just, I think what I came to look at myself and to the story that I had in my mind is I endure. That I'm going to endure. No matter what happens, no matter what hardship comes against me, I'm going to endure. I'm going to, no matter what trial comes against me, I'm going to press through and I'm going to endure. And something was breaking down in me at age 40 that I couldn't like stop it. I couldn't just endure and press through it. It showed up in a big way and it affected me. Some of the meetings I was in during that time at work were just insane, chaotic meetings. And usually I would just kind of confidently make my way through it, have great things to share. But something happened. In these meetings, my chin would sometimes quiver. Sometimes my voice would break, like when you're a kid and you're either so upset or
Yeah.
you don't know what to say, and your chin quivers and your voice cracks, and you're just you can't get. It takes everything within you to try
Yeah.
to do this, and or to try to communicate. And so I I tried to stop. The first time it happened, it was in this meeting, and I couldn't believe it happened. It was so awkward. It felt weird. And I just was like, I don't know what's going on with me today,
Yeah.
but I never want that to happen again.
Yeah.
About a month later, same thing happens in this meeting. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe you need more sleep. Maybe you need more rest. Maybe, I don't know. I had never experienced that before.
Do you feel like it came when you felt fearful, when you felt intimidated, when you felt pressure, or did you like were you at the place where you could identify what was like causing it? Maybe you didn't know at the time, I don't know, and just
Yeah, well, I don't know. When it first started coming, I couldn't
you didn't know if it was like fear. I was fearful or I was intimidated or I was anxious. Like,
yeah, to me, my life had been full of
sure.
anxiety,
Yeah.
full of pressure. I think back to that law school time, like 4 days a week, 5 days, 4 days a week in law school, working 2 days on the weekend, speaking in front of, thousands in arenas, and then coming home, trying to be a dad, trying to be a husband, and then doing law school again week after week.
Right.
I just, that was my life, and I
Right.
had never experienced anything like that. But fast forward, you know, 7 years later, or whatever, and here I am. I wouldn't even say it's as stressful as
Sure.
that kind of a lifestyle, but I was like breaking down. There was something that
Yeah.
I wasn't able to just easily ease my way through life. Or even to endure it. I didn't know what was going on at that point in time. And so I remember that it was getting more and more frequent, to like maybe I would have an episode once a week, once every 2 weeks. And it was getting embarrassing, and I could tell others, and could tell that there was something going on.
Yeah.
And so it kind of set me on a search, pain, it starts, if it comes and it doesn't leave, it keeps knocking at your door. It's trying to tell you something.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I was open to just say, okay, well, something's wrong here. It's kind of like if something hurts in your ankle, the pain isn't bad. It's just telling you need to investigate what happened. There's an injury. There's something that's not whole. You need to go investigate a little bit. And so I tried to do my due diligence, and I went to my physician, and I had my blood work done. And I did notice that it came back, everything was fine, except for my testosterone level was my. I guess there's two different kinds of testosterone levels that they check. One is in your bloodstream and blood flow, and that one was low. And so I got on testosterone, and that really helped. It helped my mental concentration. It helped me. And I saw definitely some changes and some positive results, but it didn't fix what was going on. And I remember I was sitting on the in a seat in the bathroom, up in our bathroom, and I was just thinking about okay, what's happening, and I knew that it must not be physical. Like I was in great shape, except for my testosterone levels, and we had fixed that, but I was still having these episodes. So I knew it must be emotional. I knew that it had to be something psychological or emotional. And so my next place after going to the physician was to go and to get a counselor. I had a friend he had talked about going to his counselor, and she was on iPhone, or you could digitally contact this individual, and she began to talk to me about kind of like, what was your past like, and what's going on in your life, tell me more about that. And as we were walking through some of those things, I began to tell her in one of those phone calls, I began to tell her about the years where I had this abusive stepdad. And she said, so tell me, a little bit more about this abusive stepfather of yours. Like, what would he do? And I just began to tell her, some of the most, I don't know, few worst years of my life. I was in middle school. And man, he was just, I don't know, he was just one of the worst human beings that I've ever met in my life. And I say that because, he would come home from work at around 3, and my mom would come home from her job at around 6 p.m. and he would be home at around 3:30 p.m. And those middle hours during the day were some of the most fearful, anxious hours. The kind of the in between, in between being at school, I would get home, be there for a little bit, and then we would hear his boots coming in through, upstairs through the front door. And I remember it was kind of the same ritual every day. I would hear the work boots clomping across the wooden floor of the kitchen. And then you would hear a cabinet open up, and you'd hear a bourbon bottle open. You'd hear the refrigerator open, and he always drank bourbon. He drank about a quart of bourbon a day. He drank a whole bottle almost every day, but he drank it with 7-Up. So from about 3:30 to about 9 o'clock, he was drinking in the evening before, and then he'd pass out for bed and wake up early and head to, the construction site or the job site. During that time, as he'd start drinking. It was, no matter what we had, if we had homework or whatever, it was time to start working. And for me, being in 6th grade, it was like work that I had never even been subjected to. I grew up in suburbia, lower class suburbia. I had a single mom raising me, and the extent of my labor was vacuuming,
right,
and helping out with the house, maybe taking out the trash, and maybe mowing the lawn. That was that was hard labor for me. But we had 5 acres of land, and so for him it was, all right, take this chainsaw and chop down this tree, and then take this wood and split all this wood up so that we can use it. Dig these holes in this rock hard clay with a post hole digger, and building this retaining wall, which I didn't even know what a retaining wall was. It's this big U-shaped thing in the backyard. I had no idea. And he would stand up on the porch with a cigarette in hand and a glass of bourbon in the other, and just yell profanities down like, you're a lazy fat ass. I was a large kid, at that time.
It's awful.
He'd be yelling and screaming, get to work and grab the shovel. And I'd be like, I don't know where that is. He's like, well, it's right there. If it was a snake, it would bite you, you lazy, you fat, lazy, you're not good for anything, but you're like a seagull. You're nothing good for, sitting, eating, and, I don't know if we'll bleep that out or whatever, but the profanities would come. And for a single parent mom who was raised by a pretty nurturing mother,
that's so hard
to be all of a sudden in this culture, I hadn't really even processed that. And she said, my counselor, she was saying to me, she said, Joel, she was digging into this because I had told her, of course, that I'm a 40-year-old man and my chin is quivering and I can't function.
Right.
And so she's digging into this trauma,
Yeah.
back in the day. And she said, so what would you do? Like, how would you maneuver that situation? And I just, I told her, well, I was in 6th grade. I just tried to get out of the way.
Yeah.
I just tried to put my head down. I just tried to not get into any conflict, not cause any conflict. Just try to stay unseen if I could. And that's when, of course, there's a lot of tears when I was kind of working through this. And
oh my gosh,
this
I can
isn't
only imagine.
This is something that I thought like I had. I mean, I could talk about it. It wasn't like I was like hiding it in a closet.
Right.
It would be something that I would openly share with anyone, or even if I was sharing with others, or I talk about, I had these 3 years that were, just traumatic for me, and I wouldn't have anything. I just wasn't connecting the pieces that at that time in life I developed this way of surviving,
right,
where I just put my head down. I just became unseen. I didn't speak without thinking it through. My actions, I would think about them. And, as I'm processing it even right now, during that time, I felt so stupid. I felt so dumb because he'd be like, "You're a dumbass. You're so stupid. Yeah, how come?" He was wanting me to be a soldier when I never even had a loving father.
Right.
Like my dad and mom got divorced when I was 14 months old, so I didn't grow up with a dad, and so I think I had a longing to be a beloved son. And he was like, "I'm here to make you a man."
Right.
And I think it struck a wound in me. I remember every day after school, before he would come home, I would go up into his bedroom and my mom's bedroom. They had a VCR up there and a television. Oh my gosh. And I don't think we had another VCR. Maybe in my brother's room there's a VCR. But there was nothing, nowhere else where I really could watch TV. So I'd sneak up into their room, and we had The Wizard of Oz. And I remember every day, almost every single day after school, my favorite part was when it turned color, and she came, Dorothy came into, the Munchkin land, the village there, and that whole part, and the Yellow Brick Road, and then to the Scarecrow, where the whole part where they talk, and then his song of singing "If I Only Had a Brain." I would watch that every single day. I knew the lyrics. I think in some ways I think I knew there was something inside of me that was wanting to be intelligent, that was knowing that I was intelligent, but feeling like a scarecrow.
Yeah.
Feeling like maybe, I don't know, maybe finding my role in this lovable character who felt so stupid and inadequate. I even look at, I think this was such a defining thing for me. I mean, in the song, one of the lines goes, "I could be another Lincoln if I, do some sort of thinking if I only had a brain, And my son is named Lincoln. There were so many defining things that I found in those moments of that movie during this time of trauma. And I think during that, I was trying to find myself, trying to escape, trying to figure out who I was. I think that was a huge insecurity. My education at that point, feeling stupid, feeling dumb. I struggled in school, all of those things. And just trying to stay out of the way of his verbal abuse and his physical abuse. So as we're processing this and going through this, some connections began to come about with the current state where I was at and the meetings that I was in and the anxious environment, some of the toxic environment that I was in, the pressure that I was feeling, and the coping mechanism that I created for survival at 12, and 13, that was really good for that time.
Yeah.
Like, it helped me to survive. Like, it helped me make it from in a situation where really my life was on the line. The last night I'd ever see my stepdad, he was in a drunken rage and was threatening to throw me from the second story of our home. And that night he didn't ultimately do it, but it was traumatic, and I could hear his fists going through walls, breaking through the sheetrock, and this tantrum, the terror that he would bring.
Yeah.
He passed out and went to work the next morning, and my mom, she packed us up and we just left. And we never saw him since. We just left town. He never found us again. And so me surviving and learning the surviving coping mechanism of saying, okay, no matter what happens, we're going to make it. Just keep your head down when it gets, just keep going, just keep pursuing, just keep enduring. This coping mechanism that saved my life, I didn't realize that I was walking through that for the rest of my life.
Wow. Yeah. I think what's interesting about what you're sharing, it's so interesting to me and funny how you can process your story. Like, you can talk about your story. I mean, I've heard you share about your stepdad since I've known you, like 14 years ago. But there's a difference, I think, between sharing the story, sharing the experience, and processing the pain. I think
That's good.
There's a big difference between you can share the story, and sometimes you can share it so confidently, you can share it without emotion. But there's a big difference between, you've always shared your story of your stepdad. I mean, I've heard it since before you and I even formally knew each other. I heard your story about your stepdad. But I think what was happening on the other end of this conversation with your counselor was that maybe, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but it sounds like maybe for the first time you were processing the pain that was attached to what you experienced in the 6th grade with your stepdad,
Yeah, I think I was processing the pain. And I think that the pain I was experiencing at the present, this, cracking voice and this wounded child, so to speak.
Wow, yeah.
That was like physically trying to get out of me.
Right.
And
crazy.
What saved my life at 13, at 12, was now taking my life at 40.
Yep. That was so true and so good.
And it was good, and it was necessary for me at that age. It was not appropriate anymore in my life.
Yeah.
Because it was keeping me from my true authentic self, and it was keeping me trapped in a story and in a time and in a way of life that I no longer needed for survival.
So do you feel like the circumstance you were in, the environment that you were in, was a trigger to what you experienced as a teenager or in 6th grade with your stepdad? Do you feel like it was triggering you, thus causing the coping mechanisms that you used to utilize in 6th grade when you were with an abusive stepdad?
Absolutely. I feel like the environment that I was in was an abusive environment.
And it was triggering unprocessed things that you had not fully.
Yeah. In that room, there were 2 individuals that were in positions of authority over me. One was verbally abusive, and again, not all the time, but often enough. And the other one kind of worked as an enabler. Now, this individual had the authority, the enabler had the authority to stop it, but chose not to. I think seeing
It
that
triggered you 100%.
because what I was experiencing as a child was my stepdad and my mom, and one enabling the other to continue with an abusive behavior. And I've never even put that connection together fully till like right now.
Yeah.
And so it was triggering it. It wasn't, I don't think it's so much, I mean, that those folks are doing their deal and that's their issue and that's what's going on in their life. But that issue that's going on in their life triggered.
Yeah.
And I actually can say thank you. You know,
Yeah.
thank you that I'm just glad that I was put in that situation so that it would manifest in me so that I could take care of something that I didn't even know was going on.
Yeah. It's so interesting how sometimes we're involved in circumstances or a meeting or something, whatever it might be, that triggers something on the inside of us. And I think our responsibility is to chase down the trigger and find out what is it that's triggering me. And oftentimes, if you chase the trigger down and you get to the root, you realize that it's unprocessed pain. It's a wound that you fully haven't opened up and processed through and given yourself the opportunity and the space to heal. You know, it's so interesting. I think that I was in those meetings with you and I got to see this happen. Like I got to witness what you were walking through. And I remember you like sharing with me what you were going through. And I think it was the intensity of what was transpiring. It was intense. You know, and I don't think we need to necessarily divulge what was going on in the meetings other than the fact that I think it triggered something in a lot of people in that room. But, you know, it's funny. We see the same counselor, you and I. Yeah. And so it's been so fun to walk through this journey of processing triggers. But it's so cool. Our counselor, we see her separately. She said something to me that I thought was so fascinating. She said the brain oftentimes does not know how to process trauma. So what it does is it freezes it. It freezes it.
Yeah.
And it never lets you process it. Your brain does not know how to comprehend processing trauma. And so oftentimes what you experienced as a 6th grader with your abusive stepdad, your brain froze it, right? It's like you freeze that emotion and you can talk about it. You can talk about it without talking about the pain that's attached to it. And then isn't it fascinating that you can be in an environment or a circumstance or a situation that triggers a pain in you of that trauma that you experienced. And it's almost like a hammer that just boom, busts open or shatters this brick of ice. And right in the center is this unprocessed trauma and this unprocessed pain. And so never ignore a trigger, right? And ultimately, if you chase the trigger down to the root and you process it, the trigger loses its power over you, is what I'm kind of even learning as I'm kind of learning my own triggers. I think it's if you'll chase that trigger to the root, which is exactly what you did through your counseling appointment, through understanding that, oh my gosh, the trigger to my quivering chin and the trigger to what I'm feeling, this emotion, this intimidation that I'm feeling, really stems back from a very abusive situation that in 6th grade you didn't fully know how to process.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times the temptation is to focus on the one who is activating that trigger.
Totally, that's
and
so good, Joel.
To say they're this or they're that, but really what the professor is trying to say is, here's this person that is triggering these things that we need to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what it's doing what pain is trying to teach you in the midst of a trigger. See, what we do when somebody triggers us is I think we surrender to that person and we let them continue to have the power over us. But
Not the person in the room with you at present, but the person of your past.
or both.
Or both.
Or both. Or both. You know, I think sometimes when there's a person in your life that triggers you, that person can always have power over you because they provoke a really painful memory, they remind you of your trauma, right?
Yeah.
But when you chase that trigger down, you address it, you process it, that trigger is no longer has power over you. It gets weaker and weaker, and you get stronger and stronger. And so what happens is when you're in that opposition, or you're with that person or that circumstance or that situation that triggers you,
Yeah.
they also lose their power. And it's really not about them losing their power as much as it is you gaining your power.
Oh, that's so it.
And so you
That's
can
it.
be in the exact same situation that maybe it's crazy, maybe it's abusive, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's not, but you have processed and dealt with your trigger. And so that trigger no longer has power over you. You have power over it. And you have, and again, I just want to say that again, it's not about that person having power over you or you having power over them. It's about you being in control of your own self. Right? And what that is doing your work.
It's doing your work.
That's what it is.
It is.
It's doing your work. It's saying, oh my gosh, this triggered me. But when you get triggered, when like a pain trigger happens, it sucks. It's awful. I hate it. Like, I've been aware of some triggers recently, and it, oh my God, I hate it. I'm full of tears and I cry, and it provokes you. But if you will just sit with it, right? That was your teacher, Joel. That was pain knocking on your door and saying, come in and let me sit with you and let me teach you a really great lesson, that you're no longer that wounded 6th grader who couldn't stand up to an alcoholic, abusive stepdad. That's not who you are anymore. You have a voice, and you're stronger than you ever knew that you were. You're an amazing father, an amazing husband. Like, I love that, you know, but you did your work, right? You got on the other end of a very difficult counseling appointment with an amazing person who made you process that trauma. And it was painful. And I mean, I want to speak for you, but
And
I remember that night.
What do you remember that night?
Oh my gosh. Like, I remember you sobbing, like just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I was like, oh my God, what did you do? What did counseling do to you? But I think it unlocked. And I remember I had the exact same experience with Sharon. Is it okay to say her name?
Yeah. Of
Okay.
course. We're gonna have her on the show. I mean, she's coming, whether she wants to or not. She is coming.
I feel like Sharon is somebody that I hold so near and dear that I don't want anybody else to have her. I'm so protective over her. I feel like maybe we should have made up an alias name for her or something, but we could call her Susan.
Oh my gosh. That's such an inside joke, y'all.
So let's call her Susan. I want to call her Susan. Susan, I already let the cat out of the bag. Their name is Sharon.
Yeah.
But anyway, I remember that night, like, you had gotten off your counseling appointment with Sharon and you were just sobbing. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, what did this lady do to my husband? But I think it was the first night that you truly, from an adult perspective, process the pain of your stepdad and the abuse of your stepdad. And you shifted when you did that, Joel. Like, I watched you get stronger in the environment that was triggering you. And I know that because Sharon has hit a very big trigger for me where I had to process things with my dad. And I'll never forget that night. I had like an emotional vulnerability hangover for like a week. I mean, you would have thought I drank a bottle of tequila all by myself in one night. No, I just did a really intense counseling appointment, you know, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean.
Back to your.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, if you were going to drink a whole bottle of tequila, I mean, hopefully you made margaritas out of them.
Hopefully. So, okay, let's go back to that appointment with your counselor where you realized it was your trigger. how long did it take you before you were able to overcome that and like not experience the quiver, not experience the like shaking of your voice and the intimidation? I mean, how long did it take? What happened? What was that journey like?
Well, I wish it would have just stopped. Like, okay, I had my cry, and I'm better now, you know.
Right? Yeah,
But it
totally.
wasn't. It wasn't. I still was experiencing the same thing, but it began as I began to recognize that, was aware of, okay, your coping mechanism that you had when you were 13 or 12, like you can't do that. Like that's not appropriate anymore.
Yeah.
You are a 40-year-old man who has his doctorate, who has great ideas to share, who has navigated a life, who has been an amazing husband, if I may say so myself, who's been,
You took the words right out of my mouth.
a darn good dad. And that's not who I am, and that's not how I need to proceed.
Right.
So being aware of that began to transform me.
Yeah.
I think as I also continued to process that time, something that Sharon, our counselor, spoke to us was that your brain can only take so much trauma at a time.
Yeah.
So time releases it, and you have to go back to it.
Yeah.
Over weeks, could be years, but it's so much trauma at one time that your brain can't handle it at one time. It would be too much.
Yeah.
And so that to keep you surviving, you have to kind of go through it. But once I was aware that was how I was coping through life, I was able to take step by step by step and begin to have more and more of an awareness in those meetings. So it went from like, instead of once every 2 weeks, it went, then it moved to a little bit longer, that would happen every 3 weeks to a month. And then a couple months would pass, but it would still come back. I'd still be embarrassed, kind of at that meeting or that time. But I grew stronger and healthier. And I can say today, I can't even remember the last time I had one of those episodes.
Yeah, I love that.
That I celebrate in a big way.
Yeah. I love this quote. I want to read it.
Yeah.
Because I think when I reflect back on the environment that was triggering you, I have a lot of mixed emotions that I don't know that we're ready to process on the podcast just yet. But I love this quote. True forgiveness is when you can say, thank you for that experience.
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
And I think you can look back on that experience in a very explosive environment, a very heated environment, a very verbally, I'm going to say probably borderline verbally abusive environment. You can look back on that and you can say, thank you for that experience, because you are stronger. Like, you didn't just triumph over that situation. You didn't just triumph over the people that were causing you to experience the triggers. Like, you triumphed over your stepdad. You triumphed over that 12, 13-year-old boy who at the time didn't know how to process what you were going through. You know what I mean? Like, thank you so much for that experience, because it led you to greater levels of healing. And that, you know what I love about that, Joel? That's true power right there. Absolutely. And that is not power from anybody else but within yourself. Mm-hmm. God-given power that always is within you. And I love that. I love it when you tap into a power source, really the God that is on the inside of you is what I believe it is, but you tap into a power that is yours and yours alone, that nobody can take away from you, that nobody can bully out of you, that nobody can intimidate out of you, that nobody can yell and scream profanities and put you down and diminish you, because you overcoming a trigger, you processing the pain of a 12, 13-year-old kid and what you walked through, you processing that pain and triumphing over that is a strength you found from within yourself that nobody can take away from you. And I love that. Like when you find that strength within yourself, man, the power is within your own hands.
And I was giving away power
Totally.
when I was in those situations.
Yep.
And I think that's the gift that God gave me in this environment that he called me to, that he placed me into, was saying, I no longer want you to live in this way. I no longer want you to live unauthentically or to give away your power when you're put in these situations, because that's not who I made you to be. That's not the Creator made me to be that way. Some of you listening out there, maybe as far as you could say, I don't know if there's a Creator, but the universe, whatever it is, I believe it's God. God created me to be powerful, to be strong, to be unafraid, unintimidated. And I, unknowing to my conscious mind, was giving it away when I would be in those situations. And not living to my full potential and authenticity as he designed and created me to be.
So here's what I love about the whole story that you just processed. At 40 years old, in an explosive meeting, when your voice quivered, your chin quivered, and your voice kind of shook, that was pain knocking at your door is what that was.
That was the professor.
Yeah.
Saying, I have a lesson to teach you.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes pain knocking on your door is really embarrassing.
Oh. Okay, can I just say how emasculating that was for me?
Yeah, I know. I remember, Joel. I remember you walking through it. Like, it broke my heart, like it broke my heart to watch you. But can I just say this? Like, in the midst of you feeling emasculated in those meetings, I sat in those meetings with you. Like, I was in those meetings as your wife. Not all of them, but some of them. But can I be honest with you? You took the brave and courageous way out. You could have medicated. You could have caved in and given them what they wanted, which is to control you. Like, you didn't do that. You were so courageous and so brave about the way that you handled it.
Wow,
and let me just say this. In some people's eyes, they would have thought that it was you're being a wuss or whatever. In my eyes, to chase down that trigger and say, I'm going to get a counselor and I'm going to find out what is going on. Oh my God, I think that's the most courageous thing that anybody could ever do. And you processed it and you went there and you triumphed over it so victoriously. And I think that that's what an incredible man does. A man who's not afraid to process his emotions, but to really go there and say, what's happening to me? And I've got to get on the other side of it, I think is one of the most courageous things that you could have ever done. And here's what happened. Pain knocked at your door. And there's always nosy neighbors. Not that we have nosy neighbors. We have the best neighbors on the face of the planet. But there's always people looking into your life wondering what's going on, right? Pain knocking at your door is very public. Sometimes it's very public. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You can't escape it.
You can't escape it. But pain knocked on your door in the form of a shaking chin and a quivering voice. And you opened up the door and you invited him in. And he taught you. He taught you that there was unprocessed trauma and unprocessed pain. And you grew on the other side of that and you became stronger. Mm-hmm. You became stronger and you were no longer an abused 13-year-old kid who was giving your stepdad all the power. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about, right? Like that right there is what it's all about. Listen, I know a lot of people who probably would have run from that and escaped from that. And this is what oftentimes we do, and we've all been guilty. Like, there's no shade in me saying this. We've all done this, me included. You feel a trigger come on. And what trigger is, what that is pain knocking at your door, right? You feel pain knocking at your door. But here's what we do sometimes, and I talked about this in the last podcast. We close the blinds and we bolt the windows shut and lock the doors and close the garage. And we ignore that he's there, and then we self-medicate, right? We scroll, we turn on the television, we open up a beer or pop open a bottle of wine. We self-medicate. We ignore that pain is knocking at our door because that's a cheap way out. It's an easy way out, and we've all done it. We've all done it. Like, we get busy, we ignore the feeling, we press through it, and you didn't do that. Like, you really invited pain to come in and sit with you, and you were victorious on the other side of it.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome.
Maybe I'll just kind of land this plane.
Land it.
With this.
Land it.
Several months back, I had the awesome opportunity to be at a night with John Eldridge.
Yeah.
And he was sharing it was an all men's meeting, and he was sharing, and he was just talking to us about what it looks like to be the warrior. He was talking about the stages of a man's development and how, in order for a man to be whole, that he's got to walk through the stages in a healthy way. And the stages are the beloved son. You have to be that. Maybe that's 1 to 10. That's the major focus. That you need them all for your whole life, and they lap over each other, but that's a major focus. Then the next one, John calls it the cowboy stage, where it's more adventurous and you want to go try stuff, and you're trying to find things to make ramps to jump your bike off of, and it's that stage. And if you're not the beloved son, if you don't know that, or if you don't have that cowboy stage, man, it makes the next stages more difficult.
Yeah,
because
it's a building block, right? Like, you're building on top of each other.
Yep, the next kind of stage that overlaps is the warrior stage, and you get a cause. You get, whether it's a political cause, or whether it's a religious cause, or whether it's just something you're passionate about, comes and you fight for this thing. And then kind of the lover stage comes in there, and it's mixed in with the warrior stage, where you're all of a sudden poetry and art, that band, oh man, they get me, they're speaking to me right now, whether it's music or art or something, there's something that comes alive in you, the romance as well.
Yeah.
But all of this comes together for one of the main purposes is becoming a king, where you have your influence, your dominion grows larger than ever. Maybe you have a family now, and now that you're not just, you're a manager now, or you own your own business now, and your influence expands. And he was talking about these different stages and how God can actually father you back through if you miss the stage.
Wow.
Like if you were never the beloved son.
Yeah.
God is out of time and space. That even if you're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 and you never experience that, you can go back with the creator of fatherhood.
Yeah.
The creator, and you can be healed. Maybe you were overprotected as a child and you never had adventure, but God can take you back even now through adventurous situations and heal some of those wounds.
Yeah, I love that.
So he was talking about that, and then the next morning I woke up and I went to breakfast, and I was sitting at this booth by myself with my journal. I hadn't had an episode where my chin quivered in a long time at this point. But this is what I wrote to myself just this last February. And I wrote a letter to me at 12 years old.
Wow.
And I'll just share that with you.
All right.
Young Joel, I've got you. I will take care of you. It's better that you allow me to handle the stresses of life. You were asked to carry things a child should not have to carry. You don't have to carry them anymore. You are beloved of God and by me. And this is the 40-year-old talking to the 40-something-year-old talking to the 12-year-old. You don't have to wear that armor anymore. It doesn't fit. God has healed us and strengthened us. Let down the defensive and offensive armor. You don't have to be scared. You are not a slave. You don't have to scamper anymore or belittle yourself. You don't have to wear what you never should have. We got you, me and God. We love you, and we want you to run free. We want you to be carefree and feel all the pride and love of our Father. I'm proud of you. You did a great job getting us through some tough times. You will always be a part of me. You helped me get here. Thank you. But today, I'm going to lead. I am a man. I am made to handle man problems, obstacles. So thank you for you, and thank you for who you are. But you are free to be a child, so loved by the Father. I'm going to carry the sword, the armor, and wear the crown. I am the rightful king, a king who bows to the king. That was a capital K, God.
So beautiful, Joel.
And that's what we do.
Yeah.
We walk into the pain. We walk into when pain becomes public, it's saying, I have something more for you.
Yeah.
And then we heal, whether it's the child, the beloved son, whether it's the cowboy, whether it's the warrior, whether it's the lover, whether it's the king, wherever you need to be met, you go, you press into the pain so that you, where you are in this present day, can place the crown upon your head that you were always meant to wear. And you respect what maybe a childhood moment or a teenage moment or a young man moment that you had to press through and you had to survive, and you honor that.
Yeah.
Because your past has gotten you to where you are at your present. But your past and what you used to cope and survive can no longer go with you into the present place of your purpose that you're called to.
Yeah, so good.
And so maybe there's some men out there who are listening to this. It's time to press into the pain. The most courageous thing you could do would be to allow the professor in.
Yeah.
And to let him understand, to let him teach you so that you can understand what's holding you back from walking in your true power, authority, authenticity. So, where do you need to heal?
Yeah.
Where do you need to go back into? Is it the beloved son? Right now, I know that you could ask God to father you. He is the inventor of parenting and fatherhood. He's the best. Maybe you were sheltered, you didn't get the adventure. Maybe you were always intimidated. Walk with God through it. Maybe you've never had a cause to fight for. There's a cause waiting for you. Walk into the pain. Let that pain teach you. Walk through the embarrassment. It's uncomfortable, get some help. I didn't know how to process the pain on my own. I'm a guy, and sometimes I don't know if I can process feelings that well. But I got a coach, a counselor, who could help me walk through those things. And I just want to tell you, there is freedom waiting for you. It may be messy, but let me tell you, you're not messed up. It may be messy, but your message is found in your mess.
Pain is our most beautiful teacher. He's a professor, and he's knocking at our door at times, not all the time.
Thank God.
Thank
I couldn't do it all the time.
God, but when he comes, invite him in, because he has amazing lessons in store for you. We've created this podcast because we love helping people along their journeys.
Beyond the podcast, you'll find us coaching folks through their messy moments. We do this online or on site for individuals, couples, and organizational leaders.
So if you'd like to talk to one or both of us, you can head over to joeljohnson.org, or you can get in touch with us through social media.
Also, if you like the show, head on over to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a review.
And you can share it with your friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to Messy Life Podcast.